Gemakkelijk. That means easy. Geweldig. That means fantastic. I'm Veronica Lewis, and today on Let's Go Dutch, we have some geweldig and gemakkelijk day trips from Amsterdam. I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. We'll explore two great open-air museums, the Zaanse Schans with its working windmills and houses from the Zaan region. Then we'll head to the town of Enkhuizen and the former fishing villages in the Zuiderzee Museum. So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch! Just 20 minutes from Amsterdam is the Zaanse Schans. There are buses and trains, so it's a very easy side trip. Most of the buildings around the site are original houses from the Zaan region. The Zaan is a river north of Amsterdam, and the villages it runs through make up the Zaanstreek. In the 17th century, there were 1,000 windmills producing everything from wood, paint, oil, and mustard. This was the age of exploration and colonization, and wood was in great demand for shipbuilding. Cross this little wooden bridge, and suddenly you're on a picture-perfect street, lined with adorable green and white cottages. Here you'll find a general store and a museum on Dutch clockmaking. These wooden facades were quite popular, as wood was in abundance throughout Holland. In 1887, a Dutch lad named Albert Heijn took over his parents' grocery store in Zaan. Little did he realize one day it would become the Netherlands supermarket chain store. I'm sure he would have loved this faithful recreation of his first store. Hallo. This is Het Jager's house, and in 1623, Klaus Jager owned it. As the king of his castle, that would make him the Jägermeister. The house is original and is from Zaandam, and so are the windows. It was covered in black because tar covered houses at that time before they were painted. These stained glass windows are a much older style than these windows. Plomp! Sounds like I give you clomp on head. Plomp! It really means wooden shoe. Ah yes, the Dutch are known for wooden shoes. Klompen. There's a whole lot of klomping going on in this warehouse from 1780. Let's klomp it on in. Molen, that means windmills. A molenaar is the guy who works the windmill. He would wear klompen. And boeren, that means farmers. They would wear klompen too. Kasbore Katarina Huva. Kas means cheese and Bore means farm. So let's go see what kind of cheese Katarina is farming. I bet it's Gouda. The Kasbore gives regular demonstrations of cheese making. Lasting about 15 minutes, you'll learn the whole process of how that lekker kaas is produced. The wax covering can preserve the cheese for several years. Dutch cheeses are very good for you as they are high in vitamin K. In the storeroom, there are samples of different cheeses to try, and you can of course buy some to take home. Now, let's have ourselves a taste. Yes, it's Gouda. Gouda. Smell that. Try harder. Me knows it's a bakery. What else does me knows? Me knows that in 1970, this bakkerij in de gegronde Dijvenkate was moved from Zaandijk to here. The name comes from the bread that is made in the area. This resembles the tea houses we saw in Edam. It's called the Tinkoepel. In the Netherlands, pewter is known as tin, hence the name Tinkoepel. To Don Quixote, there are a bunch of monsters with which he will do battle. To the North Sea, there are also a bunch of monsters with which they will do battle. To the Dutch, they may creak and rattle, but to be without them is to be up the Krapelik Creek without a paddle. Let's have a closer look at these bad boys. First up, the Gegronde Polenburg. This mill was built in 1869, and before being pushed out by the advancing railroad, it lived in Koch aan de Zaan. This is a sawmill, and one of the features in this type is that the whole body rotates to face the wind. This mill is de kat, the cat, and sure enough, they have a cat. The original windmill was actually built on this site in 1696 and made paint. Perhaps Saskia, the wife of Rembrandt, came here to fetch a few pigments.
Can you pick me up some ultramarine, some Indian yellow, and some brown?
Do you want Van Dyke brown?
Van Dyke has his own brown?
You have a toothpaste. It comes in a tube, just like paint.
I have a toothpaste. I have a toothpaste.
In the 17th century, you went to the Vlees house and picked yourself up some nice, lean corned beef. Then you went to the bakkerij for some rye-brood. One thing missing, natuurlijk, mustard. Well, this just so happens to be a mustard mill, the Houseman. Billy Eric, you're always good for a tell. What can you tell us about the Houseman?
The name Houseman comes from a Dutch roster who lived here. One day he was sitting out on his porch when a carriage riding by stopped, and a nobleman peered out the window and said, "Pardon, hebt u wat graespoep aan?" "Komen me Houseman," was the answer, and it's been known as the Houseman ever since.
The storehouse was known as the Haan. The Houseman windmill was plopped on top in 1955, and the working gears come from a spice mill. This little windmill is called the Hatto, and it had the noble job of draining water from reclaimed land. The sails power the wheel, which keeps water moving into the canal and drainage ditch. In 1968, the Hatto said, "I've Hatto enough. I'm retiring to Zaanse Schans." Zoeken means to seek, and this mill is the zoeker. What might we search for inside? Oil. This mill extracts oil from seeds and nuts. While the Zaan region is just northwest of Amsterdam, Enkhuizen is about 53 miles northeast. We'll catch the train from Amsterdam, and in no time... Now we're heading to the Zuiderzee Museum, but we certainly have to wandel around Enkhuizen itself. Enkhuizen received their city charter in 1355. In the 17th century, it was a major harbor town and a member of the Dutch East India Company, along with Amsterdam, Delft, and Hoorn. Competition with Amsterdam and war with England ultimately led to the decline of Enkhuizen. The city is still a major fishing port and is not shy to show off remnants of its prosperous past. The most famous site of Enkhuizen is the imposing Dromedaris. It was built in 1540 as part of the original fortifications, and then in 1649 the tower was extended. This house has the coat of arms from nearby towns. We have first Hoorn, Oranje, West-Friesland, then Enkhuizen. Medemblik. You might be interested in what's inside. It's the Vlees en Scheepjes Museum. I knew that would tickle your fancy. Vlees means bottle, and a schip is a ship. Vlees en Scheepjes translates to little ships in bottles. Now seriously, have you ever seen so many? Some of these are 750 years old. This is the Stadthaus, and the design is neoclassical. It was built in 1686. Notice the coat of arms with the 3 herrings on it. Shows you how important the herring industry was. This cannon came from a shipwreck. The ship was from Duinkerken, which today is in France, but back then it was a Dutch city. Above the cannon on the wall of the Stadthaus is a poem by our good friend Joost van den Vondel. You remember him from Amsterdam and Vondel Park? He's the Dutch Shakespeare. This is the Waag, and since Enkhuizen was a Dutch East Indies member, you can bet the Way House did brisk business. Since 1559, they had a first look at all kinds of exotic goodies coming off the VOC ships. VOC translates to Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company. This is the Zuiderkerk, and it was built between 1423 and 1458. The tower went up in 1450, but between 1518 and 1526, they added the upper section along with the onion dome. There's a 45 bell carillon up there. The Zuiderzee Museum has 2 parts, the outdoor museum called the Buiten Museum and the indoor museum, the Binnen Museum. The buildings that make up the Binnen Museum were warehouses from the Dutch East Indies Company, known as the Paper House. These are the guys that were busy exploring and colonizing the Far East, like present-day Indonesia. The name Paper House comes from the spices being brought back. The Zuiderzee, it means the South Sea, and it no longer exists. The Dutch were constantly wrestling with the sea, both the North Sea and the South Sea. The North Sea is huge and quite strong, but the South Sea was an inland bay of the North Sea. While the Dutch built defenses against the Noorderzee, they made a full-scale assault on the Zuiderzee. They closed it off and created a lake, the IJsselmeer. They drained other parts to create more land, called polders. In contrast, the stone and brick step gables or neck and bell gables of Amsterdam, the small fishing villages are characterized by green wooden facades. Plaques on the wall not only tell you where the houses came from, but also little stories that put a human face on the history. The herring industry was big here and still is. This is a recreation of the harbor in Marken, built in 1840. Marken was once an isolated island and prone to flooding, so people built their houses on stilts. This is the brushmaker's house, and besides for making that brand spanking new state-of-the-art pig bristle brush you've been wanting, he also makes paintbrushes.
Brushes? Perhaps Vermeer came here and picked himself up a pair.
He's a serial rhymer.
Let's go see what brushes there be. Perhaps they'll even make a brush for me.
When I look at the bricks of this house, it reminds me of Vermeer's little street painting. Throughout the Boughton Museum, there are demonstrations in sail making, net, rope, and basket making. The smith is busy in the smiterij, banging out everything from horseshoes and tools to fishing hooks and anchors. We might even come across a Frau going about her daily chores. Here she is, keeping all those Delft tiles nice and blue in the Blauw Vishuis, the blue fish house. I am now on the island Erik with my friend.
My name is Lubbert Hoefnagel.
Just like Marken, Erik was once an island, isolated from the mainland. Constant flooding forced the inhabitants to seek higher ground, and there wasn't too much of that. In 1939, when the Dutch closed off the Zuiderzee, Erik became an isolated island no more. The men were either herring fishermen or were involved in the fish industry. When the Zuiderzee was closed off, they were forced to do their fishing on the North Sea. With the men away at sea and scarce work for the women, girls tended to go to the mainland for work as maids. The community is very tight-knit, and as you can see and hear, it's a tight fit as well. The houses had no electricity or running water.
You had to be 12 years old. So when you're 12 years old, then you're ready with school. The boys go to sea, and the girls, there's no jobs on the island, so the job...
Check out the bed box in the wall.
To become a maid.
This is the cooper. He makes barrels. It was a very noble profession in the olden days. They used barrels to preserve fish and salt, and pickling is done in barrels. What would French wine be without their oak barrels? You might say a barrel was the Tupperware of the Middle Ages. Apotheek de Grote Gappe. He's the Gappe. Gappe are the heads used to mark the pharmacies. We're here with Ham Wiggers at the apotheek.
An apotheek, the pharmacy.
The pharmacy.
In Dutch, the apotheek.
Yes.
And we have here.
Gapen is Dutch for yawner. And while they do look like they're yawning, they sometimes have a pill on their tongue. Also, a doctor typically tells you to open your mouth and say, ah. These Moor's heads, which are used to advertise the pharmacy to the illiterate, are an indication of the origins of the medicinal herbs being dispensed. There's also a bit of snake oil salesman aspect to the history. Fake doctors traveling around the country with a sidekick often costumed as a Moor. In typical snake oil fashion, one pill on the tongue and our Moor is sick no more. One of the things I find fascinating in cathedrals and churches scattered throughout Europe are the organs with their immense array of pipes. This simple little church hardly looks like it would have an elaborate organ. Well, guess what? It doesn't. But what it does have is an organ in the cupboard. Sounds perfectly normal, right? Definitely if there's a tax levied on church organs. The steam laundry started to make an appearance around 1870. Even with the help of the steam engine, it was hot, dangerous work. Here's a perfect demonstration of how the polder mill works. This is an Archimedes screw. The wind turns the screw, the water is pulled up and channeled into a drainage canal. This is what the Dutch used to steal land back from the sea. The lime kilns were transplanted from Akersloot in North Holland. They were used to burn shells into a material used for mortar. What did I say earlier? Geweldig, prachtig, niet waar? Both the Zuiderzee and the Zaanse Schans museums are quite different from one another, and especially the big city Amsterdam. I'm Veronica Lewis. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch for more gemakkelijk day trips from Amsterdam. Tot ziens! Dag! I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been.